So what I'm going to be doing here is going to be a thought exercise. And I've spent a great deal of time getting multiple angles and viewpoints. And what this particular video is going to be about is what if we were actually living in the land of the fallen? In other words, what if we, human beings, we'll just say human beings in general, are the fallen? Now this of course would mean quite a few things. Number one, if so, it would mean that the war between quote unquote heaven and hell is already over. It's already been finished. Something that finished a long time ago, and then the echoes of everything just continues to play out as the land of the fallen goes through its quote unquote hell cycles, because that's what that would mean. So there's a lot of people that have a lot of religious ideas and religious thoughts, but I don't think there's a lot of people who ever entertained maybe what it is they're actually living in, the severity of what it is that they're living in. What if the people that are here are the fallen ones, the ones who were banished and sent here to do cycle upon cycle upon cycle until, of course, they wash themselves clean, get themselves back to a normal mental state, and then at some point get sent back. Maybe those people who are here are learning to become compassionate, loving, peaceful people, peaceful souls that get to rejoin the cosmos. Because if you really think about how powerful the effect of gravity is and what it actually is, it seems to be doing quite a good quarantine job. Let's think about this. There was a war in heaven between Michael and the dragon. Michael banishes the dragon to the earthly realm, where all of the fallen ones come with them. So the big battle, seems to me, would already be over with. Then you got to consider the idea of the Antichrist, which every generation has looked for since the dawn of, since mankind was keeping record of such things. But no such thing ever occurred. Just cycle after cycle after cycle of the same stuff. War, poverty, hatred, religion. War, poverty, hatred, religion. Over and over and over in different ways. Now, one could look at the idea of deja vus, because I know people have tons of deja vus. Almost everyone I've ever known or met talk about, wow, you know how many times I had this feeling where I knew I'd already been to that place before doing that exact thing. Like the deja vu is strong. Many people will tell me that. What are the chances that the deja vu could be a repeat? Your brain remembering a repeat of something that you did in another parallel universe, parallel life, parallel reality, which layers on top of this. Because as you know, this whole thing is eternal. Right? So what if the fallen one who came down to this little place here where God specifically stated there was going to be a quarantine, what if this place is the very place? It looks like a mental institution to me. I see people who make the same mistakes all the time. I see people who, no matter how many times they are taught something, they still don't get it. I see people who intentionally hurt one another, plan and plot to do so. I see within the political spectrum all sorts of war games that are played all over Earth, and war has not been off of Earth at a single given point in history. There's always been war. It's a place where people come down here to play out a lot of their carnal, negative tendencies. What would a fallen civilization look like?
Now, what are some of the deepest desires that seems to be on the planet? The sexual appetite is definitely one thing. Mankind just consistently keeps serving itself in the sexual department. Overconsumption, whether it be food, wealth, and then the lust for wealth is magnificent. But I'm not for sure if the lust for wealth is as great as the need for fame, fortune, the idea of having the attention of the entire world. I think that really goes a long way. And when we're talking about self-serving desires that do nothing but feed the ego, those are some of the most major ones. Vanity, the need to be recognized. A lot of people need to be remembered. A lot of people have a fear of being forgotten. And ultimately, it's always the ego striving so hard to maintain intact and to feed itself, become more grandiose, larger, stronger. But you know, in the end, folks, no matter what, as far as our physical incarnations here, you got a finite amount of time, and it doesn't matter whether you're a billionaire, a trillionaire, and you've attained all the wealth in the world and everything that you see in front of you, because you end up as the same maggot food as the dude who was scrubbing toilets his entire life, or worse. You all go into the same ground and decompose the same way. People live this life judging others as if they themselves think that they will never see any form of judgment. There's a lot of people on this planet that like to put themselves on the pedestal to where they believe that their versions of morality eclipses anyone else's versions of morality, and they believe that they can actually put themselves in that person's shoes and judge them according to the world that they've walked. Many people out there always telling someone else that they're going to go to hell or they're going to be punished eternally. Always something going on like that. Or always someone exclaiming that their God is stronger and more potent than someone else's God. Those are the sort of behaviors that would only exist in the world that would be considered fallen. It's division. Division doesn't exist in, upper vibrational realms such as heavens. There's no need for it. In places like this is where mankind is constantly putting itself in the position of being God, in the position of thinking itself as morally superior than the next. And the scary thing about it is it's not just, limited to one culture. It's not just limited to one religion. It's not limited to just one frame of thought. It seems that everyone on this planet is striving to be ahead of someone else. If we look at our entertainment down here, let's look at the entertainment industry. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but what we see mostly now, if you're not getting fear in the commercials, you're also getting fear in the action movies, you're getting fear in the horror movies, you get fear in the comedies, you get fear in the trailers. I mean, the whole place is down here constantly feeding you that. The reason why people go to horror movies, which, by the way, is the #1 form of entertainment that gets sold down here in this realm, this world, is horror movies. Watching our own brethren being sliced and diced and fed back to each other. Zombie movies are the biggest thing right now going on in horror movies. Then you got vampire movies, drinking of blood. This realm seems to be fascinated with the spilling of blood. And only in the realm of the fallen do I believe that such a mentality could exist. If you look at how incredibly negative some of the movies have become, even the stuff that you can watch on regular cable, it amazes me, some of the stuff that's out there, okay? There's something called like American Horror Story. Wow. people have allowed these nightmares to become themselves. People have allowed themselves to literally soak and absorb themselves in and through negativity to the point where it starts affecting the mind no matter what. Horror is kind of just a mirror reflection of war. So for the people who chose not to go to war and experience those sort of horrors, which that has some of the most horrible bile that mankind has ever done or invented or seen, for those who won't run off to war, you got horror movies, and that provides them that fix. And like I said, that's one of the most popular genres of entertainment that exists on this planet. Even our action movies have extreme violence in them. Heck, I've seen some labeled comedies where I watched it, and then the next thing I knew, I was watching some really horrible mass murder that occurs out of nowhere, and you're just sitting there going, what's wrong with these people? Even if you don't know what you're watching, there's a lot of people who innocently watch these things, and they watch it because they have either an addiction to seeing the stuff, because that's what ends up happening when you start developing an addiction for watching it and watching more extreme things. But even if you don't know what you're doing when you're watching it, I can tell you this: the people who make that stuff, they're quite aware of what it is they're releasing out there. And the stuff that is three-dimensional horror movies, that stuff, I mean, just the fact that it's digital, it's going to interact with the ones and zeros of this environment. But once it starts to occupy in your own space, in your own living room, you're sitting there watching that sort of stuff, because that's where everything is going here as soon as 3D. You start watching that stuff in your living room, you're bringing that whole feeling, that whole vibration right to you. Your mind starts to interpret things differently. It's no longer seeing it on a flat screen where it can disassociate it with itself with certain things. Mankind is putting this in their heads willingly. Heck, I can sit and watch some of these videos, music videos on MTV, and a lot of the pop music, they've gone horror. Like, that blows my mind. There's stuff that Eminem released, I think a song called My Darling or something like that. I can't remember what it was, or 3 a.m. And it's an older video, but it has really disturbing images. And then I've seen that all throughout the pop industry. It wasn't just him. And me personally, I can look at it and almost see it as comical, because people really believe that this sort of stuff and putting this in your heads is what makes you cool, or it makes you tough, or it makes you strong somehow. And the fact is, most people who watch that sort of stuff couldn't deal with it if it was right there in front of them. Heck, how many people out there do you believe are horror fans who ended up being victims of a horrific crime? Someone who murdered them terribly. I bet you they never thought that would ever happen to them, but then one day they found themselves right there in that situation. Believe me, that sort of stuff exists. That happens all over the planet. Horror movie genre is so popular, it has reached and touched everybody. And like I said, how many people out there in the Western world who get murdered on a daily basis has that sort of thing flipping through their minds right then and there in their last 5 minutes of life? Then on the internet, I look at the stuff that exists out there, and I don't understand what has happened to the human psyche. I've known that the human psyche has been messed up for a very long time. I mean, actually I was going to say it's better now than it was in the Dark Ages, but I'm not so sure. Because there's things that exist under people's noses that they have no idea that it's there. There's things that exist in the military bases that people have no idea that's there. And there's all sorts of private little foundations that exist where they're doing all sorts of tests. So there's things that are going on that are really deep, really bad. And it's right here under people's noses. And I think to myself, what happened to mankind's will to want to connect to something beautiful? What happened to mankind's will to want to, instead of shoot a deer, to go out and run and play with one? Instead of look down upon someone because they're succeeding, to help them succeed and get them further? What happened to, kids who decide that they're on the playground and they're just going to decide to go and dominate some other kid? Why? And I think about that when people are at work with one another. And then you'll see various people of different hierarchical statuses trying to control one another and dominate each other. And then same thing with sports, same thing with artistic talent. You know, artists are always in competition with one another. Same thing with musicians. And whatever happened to the idea of camaraderie and having brethren? So that's something that's very confusing to me, and I struggle to understand. Well, actually, I do understand it, because if this place was what I was talking about earlier, then it would only make sense. But it's not like we're at rock bottom, but we have a lot of room to go up and make things better for ourselves, and there's a lot of room to go down and make things a lot worse for ourselves. I mean, what kind of a civilization is dumb enough to literally continuously cut out its own oxygen supply for the illusion of money? And well, what civilization would do something like that? Only one that's hell-bent on its own destruction, for sure. I can't imagine what would cause mankind to think that that was such a good idea, to chop down trees to print money on. Money is an illusion. As a matter of fact, this whole thing that we have out here could exist without money whatsoever. It really could. All this stuff could still be here if there was no market exchange. It just takes people to maintain it, as they always have. But mankind has to have hierarchy, and mankind has to have a thing that forces them to constantly be in competition with one another so they can have more than the other. And only in a land that was fallen would that sort of mentality exist. Only in a land of the fallen could exist a place where the religion itself is so incredibly perverted from where it should be to connect to God that it gets infiltrated and becomes a place of prostitution, a place of pedophilia, a place of hypocrisy, a place where they actually have their own banking system, knowing what money actually is and the value that it creates in a world such as this. The religions that I see down here that are most prominent, which would be the Abrahamic faiths, these are something that I have talked about in other videos, but the Abrahamic faiths specifically are very carnally oriented, blood-based, ritual-based. Talked about this before. There's Ashura from Islam, and that is a ritual where the Shiites beat themselves senseless to the point where they're bleeding in order to give their sacrifice to Allah. If a religion is blood-based by nature and it requires sacrifice, then it's actually vampiric by nature. If we look at Christianity, the drinking of the blood, the eating of the flesh, communion. By any other known scientific term, that would simply be cannibalism. Okay, we live in a world where people celebrate that as a holiday. Halloween. And yes, a lot of people will tell me, no, Halloween is about the whole sacrifice thing where they're actually doing it in terms of getting crops and everything else. I'm aware of where it started, and I'm aware of how it's celebrated now, especially in Western culture. So, if you look at the very idea that the very thing that is supposed to be here to act as a guide of morality, act as a guide of being righteous, piety, and this very thing is the stuff that is enslaving mankind through some of the most heinous acts that mankind offers, then you have to understand that the system that is down here, of which is thriving, is that of a negative fallen attitude. Some people would try to say, well, it wasn't always that way, it was pure at one point. No. I can tell you this, of the many saviors that have been on this planet, because there have been several before Jesus, but of the many saviors that have been on this planet, it seems that they would be murdered, they would be crucified, and most of them were always against the system as it stood. They weren't too much about the synagogues or the churches because they realized that the people in the churches, the clergy, those were the very people that were keeping people ignorant. They were spreading commerce in there. They were selling prostitution. They were selling what is known as indulgences, selling the stairway to heaven, telling people that they can get them to heaven. All they had to do was pay a certain cost. Okay, so these people understood that the system that was down here was completely corrupt, and only in a world that is fallen would those people who were supposedly the good people end up on a cross, crucified, and then celebrated for their death eons afterward. Jesus Christ specifically said that God is greater than I. The Father is greater than I. Never wanted to worship. And Jesus ended up being not only betrayed by his brethren, but then he was killed by the Romans, who erected an entire religion after they murdered him. Let's think about this logically. Now, if in fact that whole story is true, then one has to think about the facts and see how such a religion as Christianity could come and do the exact opposite of everything that Christ taught. In the name of the spreading of God in Jesus' name, millions of people were slaughtered, millions of people were killed. They did this not only against the Muslims, but they did it against anybody that presented any sort of resistance whatsoever. Then the Catholics started doing it to the Protestants. And then the Protestants started doing it back to the Catholics. And the Protestants only existed because of King Henry VIII. That whole thing, just watch my other video called Religion, and you will see with some of the stuff that I provided there that Protestantism only exists out of a disagreement between a king and a pope. And so it's kind of funny, but that created so much division that Christians started killing one another. Christians killing Christians. It's the thing, it's every single religion that's down here believes that it's the only one that gets the soul to the heaven. And they believe that all other religions are false and all other religions are going to hell. And so this is also within the Christian religion itself. So, the Baptists will claim everything else outside of the Baptists are going to go to hell. The Methodists will claim the same thing. Catholicism will claim the same thing. It all exists as such. Only in the land of the fallen could Christ be divided against itself, where the Christians would kill one another to have the monopoly on the soul. Most of the Catholics value the church more than they even value God. You'll hear them claim Holy Mother Church, everything for Holy Mother Church. See many people bowing to the Virgin Mary. See many people bowing to the Pope. They bow to the fallible, what they can see, touch, sense. Because the people down here are addicted to their senses. And they've become blinded by their senses. Only in the land of the fallen would such a mentality exist. Would the church itself be the type of institution that would say burn witches, that would burn heretics? Or, because heretic goes hand in hand with the idea that anyone who thought that they could contradict the church had the authority to destroy. Contradict the church could mean anything. If you decide that you don't necessarily believe in everything that's coming out of the Pope's mouth or the priest's mouth word for word, well then you could be deemed a heretic. If you didn't like the fact that they could sell the stairway to heaven, you could have been deemed a heretic. Okay, only in a place where blood flows, where negativity flows, would brother kill brother for the sake of maintaining control over the entire system. So if I were an outside observer and I'm looking at the church systems that exist down here in this particular realm, I would see a lot of corruption, because that's what would exist in the land of the fallen. Corruption, pedophilia, incest, rape, degradation, falsehoods, idols, murder. The church itself has committed more murder, and religion itself has committed more murder on this planet than any single murderer has ever done. More blood has been spilled on this planet in the name of religion than in any other format, any other institution that exists, including politics itself, because politics is governed primarily by religion. There's supposed to be a separation between church and state, but that does not exist. It does not exist in America, nor does it exist worldwide. Almost everything is a theocracy out there. Almost everything. And so, in a world of the fallen, it would only make sense that in Islam, or in the Protestant faiths, or Catholicism, that each of those religions, Abrahamic faiths, would attempt to stamp anything out that opposes it. It would only exist in the land of the fallen. It couldn't exist in a place where people were in harmony. It couldn't exist in a place where love was the primary method of which people interacted with one another. It couldn't exist in such places. It would only exist in a place where the banished ones had control. Again, I've said this before, what are the chances that gravity does its job for the specific, explicit purpose for keeping those down here that need to be down here? Again, banished from one realm to another. Now, in this particular world, we do see love. It does transpire. In this particular realm, we do see aspects of heaven and peace. But it's few and far between, especially in comparison to what's going on in what we call civilized world, civilized nations. Another example of this place being the land of the fallen would be their propensity to be governed by people whom they call royalty. Now, what amazes me about royalty on this particular planet is that it exists through the passing of bloodline. In other words, the only way that royalty can keep their bloodline entirely pure is through the act of incest. So, not only do these sort of people keep their bloodline pure by a very archaic process of which their genes are constantly recycled over and over and over. These people have a tendency to be cruel, to be vengeful, to be angry. Many of the royalty that exists on this planet are the reason, besides religion itself, for the murder of millions upon billions of people on the planet. Only these sort of people, and it would make sense in the land of fallen that these sort of people would be the ones that would be elevated amongst the rest. These are what the rest of the civilization aspire to be like. So, they're treated like celebrities. They are elevated amongst the masses. They are wealthy beyond compare. And they absorb a lot of the money from a lot of the finances through world finances, and the people continue to allow it. Only a place of the fallen would such a thing exist. Why on earth would we have inbred psychopaths making decisions and political decisions and controlling wars and all sorts of economic avenues throughout the world is beyond me. How we could allow this to happen? The only way it could happen is if the world that we live in is a reflection of the people who are in fact running it. Again, these are the people who much of society, the commoners, aspire to be. What does that say about us as a people? And they are very much in with religion as well. The very religion which is twisted and corrupt on this planet, which has murdered millions upon millions of people, which has actually spawned prostitution, incest, pedophilia. These two institutions work hand in hand with each other, royalty and the church, religion. Ask yourself why. Again, only in a land that is fallen would such corruption be possible, especially in the institutions that are supposed to protect us, supposed to teach us right from wrong. So if I'm looking at this from an outside perspective, then it becomes very obvious to me that the people who look up to these very things are a mere reflection of that. Let's talk about another pastime that would exist in a place called the Land of the Fallen. Warfare. This, to me, is one of the most obvious signs that we truly live in a place which is negatively polarized, and if there were such a thing as demons, if there were such a thing as fallen angels, then this pastime would reflect that. The world has not seen a time without war since mankind has been walking on it. Ever since there were rocks or sticks that they could pick up to bash each other's heads in with, they've been doing it. So it's rare that you've ever seen a time where the world has experienced what is known as world peace or world camaraderie. Warfare is a system that is used by very dishonest people in order to attain the resources of another system. And all bets are off. In other words, there are no rules. Rape, murder, pillage, any really horrible thing that you can possibly think of is played out on the battlefields of war. And it seems that mankind strives for it. It wants it. It craves it. There's a lot of people that state, no one ever wants war. That is absolutely untrue. Warfare is something that has been practiced since the dawn. Think about this. The rebellion between heaven and earth, the battle between Satan and Michael. The angels were banished to the earth along with their fallen god. Look at that real carefully. Rebellion, warfare, banished. Again, we're right back to a realm now where Satan himself was banished and then was given dominion and control over the earth. Would mankind's actions here not reflect that very nature? If we were to entertain the idea of what the Land of the Fallen would be, then it would definitely be filled with a bunch of people who cannot get along with one another, who are constantly trying to establish superiority over one another and gain influence. And it would be done in a place of physicality where all of their wildest dreams could be played out right there on the battlefield, where they can see and feel and experience what it is like to actually take life or to have life taken away. And why is it done? Again, resources. Sometimes it just seems to be done for entertainment. In fact, one day they will just televise war. Well, oftentimes they do it now, but it's still not done. It's done in a very clean way. Other places like Al Jazeera and other sort of news outlets will show you what's really happening, but the Western outfits tend to keep things really clean because they don't want a negative image upon what they're doing. They don't want people to see the effects of what it is that's happening to the people out there and the victims. It would make sense, right? But it would also make sense that these sort of behaviors would exist in the Land of the Fallen. This is a pastime that Americans love. This is a pastime that the Brits love. This is a pastime that the Middle Easterners love. It's been done all over the earth and just goes round and around and around and around. Let's talk about the Western addiction for pornography. And actually, it's actually worldwide now, but Westerners tend to consume the most of it. So let's just talk about the world addiction for pornography, constant sex. Now, I'm not trying to get down on people, and I'm not going to go on the whole moral tirade, but I do want to say that there seems to be a very fine line anymore between sex and violence, especially in this particular society. And it goes hand in hand, not only in the media, but also in any entertainment field that we have. The way that this system has kept the female gender down through those very avenues has been a crime in of itself, and only in the land of the fallen would such behavior exist. If I'm looking at it from an outside perspective, I see what it appears to be one gender subjugating another gender entirely. Even though they're all made of the same thing, even though that they are still human beings, they're all still primates, you see one gender mistreating on a whole the other gender. Now, there's multiple ways that this place has learned to divide itself, and the division is the very things that keep the cogs turning in this place. It's one of the very things, between commerce, and we spoke of this before, fear is what sells. And so, given that, not only can they gear entertainment towards you that way, they can gear commercials towards you that way, they can gear the entire internet towards you that way. Everything that exists out there is consumed pretty much out of the fear that either there's not enough resources, or fear that you need that product. If I don't have this, I'm going to have acne. If I don't have this, then, I'm not going to have the best shoes at school. There's always a reason that they give to you, the reason why you need to purchase it, and it's usually something out of the most archaic form of response in the human psyche, which is fear. So, if you look at the internet right now, it is rife with some extremely horrible, disgusting forms of pornography out there. Sex is a very natural thing, and I believe that it should be shown in the light of it's there for biological purposes, and B, yes, it can be there for pleasure. We shouldn't be ashamed of our bodies, and we shouldn't feel guilty, but we also shouldn't turn that gift into some sort of a disgusting act, which is just basically used to not only subjugate another human being, because there's rape, there's that form of sex that exists right there that is used to control people, it is used to gain control over, whomever is being raped. It does a psychological number to you. It does a physical number to you. It's one of the most reprehensible acts that exists out there in mankind, and mankind seems very comfortable with it. So much so they put it in, again, their entertainment, movies, and then they'll show some of the most vile, disgusting acts that come after that. There's a movie called The Serbian Film out there. It's one of the most horrible things that's ever been made. Me personally, I don't watch those sort of movies, okay? And I've lived things that I don't think people ever want in their minds, which is the very reason why I choose not to watch such things. Those who have had those experiences don't need to relive it in such weak avenues such as entertainment. If you think about what it is that mankind immerses itself with most, what sells on this planet, what we think about most, and how it all relates back to basically fear, then you can see that we do in fact live in the world of the fallen. Heck, here's some kid just screaming bloody murder as they were driving by. If I were looking from the outside as an alien, from an alien perspective, I would see a civilization that is literally trying to eat itself, feeding itself back to itself over and over, to the point where now we have scientists that are very pleased that they spent 10, 20 years in school so they could learn how to turn poo into food, turn feces into food. This is the type of planet that we live on. They're turning feces into steak. Only in a place that is fallen would such ideas exist. Cropophagia, that's what that is called, is when people eat their own poo. And now, at this point, it's going to one day be a commodity. Who knows, because of GMOs and the rise of them, it is highly possible that they've already started feeding steaks to us that are made of that, and we're not even aware of it. We live in a world as well that if there was absolutely no food, because this happens all over the earth, we live in a place where people will literally eat each other when all the resources are gone and all the chips are down. The instinct for survival down here is pretty amazing. But the thing is there would be no real need for this idea of survival or survival of the fittest if everyone learned to actually just take care of one another. It's a very easy concept. All of this could still exist without commerce or money. It's true. This would all still exist if there was never any money driving it. If people would just pitch in and do what they are good at doing and like to do, all of this could still exist. The land of the fallen, what would it produce? It would probably produce children who are being basically born and raised without conscience, breeding violence. The world of the fallen, a place that people don't know how to regulate their own birth rate here. That would be definitely what I would consider to be an aspect or a sure sign fact that you live in the land of the fallen. People who literally like to watch murder for entertainment. That's what I would call a sign of the land of the fallen. People who choose to purposely dominate one another. That is what I would consider to be the land of the fallen. People who try to control one another through religious or institutional means. Land of the fallen. You think about like the average prisons here in America, and they're pretty bad. There's some horrible things that happen in these prisons here in America, but it gets worse outside of the United States. How people treat one another in these prisons. You think about the average person that is thrown into jail who is forced to survive those sort of conditions, that being a literal hell on earth, and then you imagine that there's plenty of those people still roaming out and around and among the population. Plenty of people who are sociopathic or completely psychotic. And then put in situations where they're honed even more. That is what I would consider the sure signs of a fallen civilization. You've got people out there right now, like I said, who walk among the population. There's people who rape regularly, kill regularly. Land of the fallen. And then you look at these people who do have all of these massive sociopathic tendencies, and then you put them in positions of clergy. You put them in positions of higher politics, or even kings and queens. That is definitely a system, a sign that you're in the land of the fallen.